Hello and welcome to Better Workdays, a show dedicated to helping everyday professionals create better days at work. I'm your host, Andy Morrison from Real Custom Training, where we design and deliver professional development workshops that are relevant, engaging, actionable, and lasting. Each week on Better Workdays, we'll be taking a look at a specific concept, skill, or story that we use in our workshops. We'll make sure that they're easy to understand, fun to learn about, and most importantly, that they can be applied immediately in the workplace as soon as you finish the episode. Thank you for joining us. It's time for Better Workdays from Real Custom Training. Hey everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Better Workdays. I'm your host, Andy Morrison from Real Custom Training, and this week's episode is dedicated to the person who inspired the topic. That is my friend Nicole Marcoux Bowen. She's the registrar at Connecticut State Community College, Quinebaug Valley, where we were co-workers for several years. And in that time, we also were classmates. We graduated in the same cohort from the master's program at Eastern Connecticut State University, the organizational management program that they have there, wonderful program. And these days, although Nicole and I aren't co-workers or classmates, we still run into each other pretty often because our kids are the same age. So we see each other at things like basketball practice. And that was the case recently. And at practice, Nicole and I were talking about some classes she's going to be teaching as an adjunct professor at the community college. And one of the topics she said she'll be covering is nonverbal communication, which I was excited to talk about because nonverbal communication is something that we work into a lot of our management and leadership and communication workshops here at Real Custom Training. And one of the concepts that Nicole and I talked about is this thing called the Mehrabian Principle. And I thought after talking to Nicole that that would be a perfect topic for an episode of Better Workdays because it's a short and sweet concept. You can wrap your head around it quickly, but it packs a punch. When you understand the Mehrabian Principle and the implications of it, you can use it to your advantage and make sure that body language doesn't betray you in the workplace when you're presenting. So this episode goes out to Nicole. We thank her for that discussion and for inspiring the topic. And one of the reasons that I think the Mehrabian Principle is so important for people to know about if they want to be an effective communicator is because it answers this question for us. When is body language loudest? And by that, I mean, when is your audience going to put more stock into your body language than they do the actual words that are coming out of your mouth? So to answer that question, for those of you that are listening to this and not watching on YouTube and you can't see the image I'm going to put up, let me paint you a little picture, okay? Imagine it's a coworker's birthday, all right? You've got this coworker, Mark, and Mark's got the hat on. He's got the cone hat on. They're throwing a party for him in the office. There's cake, there's presents. But Mark is slouched over at the table. He's got his arms crossed and he's frowning. He's got a big frown on his face. Can you picture Mark looking that way? But Mark says, yeah, this is a great birthday party. I'm having a great time. And yeah, I really appreciate everybody throwing this party for me. It's so wonderful. Okay, imagine that happening. Mark looking that way and saying those things. How are you going to feel about Mark's attitude and feelings? You're probably going to be skeptical. He's saying he's having a great time, but you're reading his body language, you're hearing the tone of his voice, and you're going to be thinking to yourself, I don't believe Mark. I don't think Mark's actually having that great of a time, despite that festive hat he's wearing. That is the Mehrabian Principle in action. The Mehrabian Principle, it's based on studies by a gentleman named Albert Mehrabian. If you want to learn more about the background, you can Google it, okay? Because we want to keep these episodes short and just give you the actionable stuff. But in his studies, Mehrabian found that when there's an incongruity, I nailed that word. I can't promise I'm going to be able to do it every time I try to say it. But when there's an incongruity between your body language, your voice, and the words you're saying, the Mehrabian Principle kicks into effect. When people think there's a mismatch between those three things, here's what they rely on most to interpret the attitude and the feelings of the speaker. So here's a pie chart for you, okay? And this pie chart's divided into three slices. One of them takes up more than half the pie chart. That's 55% of the pie chart. The other slice, the second biggest one, takes up 38% of the pie chart. And the smallest slice takes up 7%. Now, when there's that incongruity between body language, voice, and words, the biggest slice of the pie for how your audience is going to interpret your feelings and attitudes gets assigned to body language. When there's that incongruity, we actually rely on body language even more than the other two factors to determine the feelings and attitudes of the speaker. So, in the case of Mark, who's saying he's having a wonderful time, but his body language indicates otherwise, when it comes to our determination of how Mark feels and what his attitude is about that office birthday party, we're going to rely on the body language. 55% of our interpretation is going to rely on that body language. And we're going to conclude Mark's not actually having the great time that he's telling us he is. The second biggest factor into our interpretation is the voice. What's the tone of voice? What's the emphasis? What's the volume? What's the pace? Things like that. That's what we mean by voice. Not what's being said, but how is it being said? If Mark is mumbling and kind of whining, despite the fact that he's saying he's having a great time, we're going to rely more on his voice to determine if he means what he's saying. And then lastly, this is the part that surprises people. Only 7% of our interpretation is going to be based on Mark's words. So you can imagine if he looks that miserable and he sounds that miserable, we're going to conclude that he's pretty miserable, despite the fact that he's trying to tell us otherwise with his words. We don't really care about the words. We care more about the body language and the voice. Now, that's the most important thing to keep in mind with the Mehrabian Principle. It applies when there's that incongruity. When body language, voice, and words don't seem to match up, the audience starts relying on body language and voice more than the words themselves. Sometimes I've seen the Mehrabian Principle used in a really general sense, and it's presented to people as kind of a communications hack, which I think does it a disservice. And when you present it as a hack, and you leave people with the sentiment that, oh, my words only matter 7%. That's not true all the time. It's only true when there's that incongruity, when your body language and your voice don't match the words. Then it's true that your words are only going to contribute to 7% of your audience's interpretation. But when you have congruity, when your words match your body language and your voice, then it's no longer the case. Then your words actually start to become the most important thing. Because the human mind, what did we rely on first before we had words and we had language, okay? From an evolutionary perspective, what do we rely on to determine someone's attitudes or feelings? Is that other person going to attack us? Is that other person going to steal our food? Is that other person going to try to kick us out of the tribe? Of course, we would go on body language before we had words, and we'd go on tone of voice. Is that person mad at me? Well, are they screaming at me? Are their fists balled up? Are they charging at me? You know, before we had words, those were the things we relied on. So it makes sense that when there's that incongruity between words, voice, and body language, that body language and voice are going to be the loudest things to us. It's baked into our caveman brains, okay? And all these thousands of years later, that is still the case. So keep that in mind. When voice and body language and words match up, okay? When Mark is full of big smiles and he's sitting upright and he's laughing and he's cheerful and he's saying, I'm having the best time at my birthday party. Thank you guys for bringing in this cake and throwing this office birthday party for me. Then there's no incongruity. Everything's matching up. Then we're going to rely on the words most of all. Now, there are more important things in the world, I guess, than office birthday parties, right? Why else does this matter to us? Well, because you should keep the Mehrabian Principle in mind anytime you're presenting to an audience. That audience, on a subconscious level, on an instinctive level, is going to be looking to see if your body language, your voice, and your words match up. Now, we've worked with some clients who meet with people as part of their job. They meet with clients. Let's say they're advising them on something, you know, this or that. If you have an employee on your team who's advising some of your customers, let's say that employee is fully confident in the words that they're saying, the information that they're presenting to the customer, the promises they're making the customer. They may be confident in those things, but if that employee is not confident in themselves, and as a result, their body language is nervous, you know, they're kind of moving all around or scratching their head or different things that kind of indicate, whoa, I'm not sure this person really believes what they're saying to us. Despite the fact that person's not lying to the customer, but their body language is betraying them because their body language is showing that they're nervous, and that makes the customer think they don't actually mean the words that they're saying. It casts doubt on that. Same thing if you're a boss and you're meeting with your team and you've got to deliver bad news. If you're telling the team, hey, we're up for budget cuts, it's going to be a rough year, but we're going to get through it. If your body language doesn't match that, If your body language is meek and your voice is quivering and you're speaking lowly, then your team is going to listen to you, but they're probably not going to believe what you're telling them because your body language, your voice, and your words don't match up. And when that happens, your body language contributes 55% and voice contributes 38% to your audience's interpretation of your attitudes and feelings. So the big lesson here is always make sure, first and foremost, when you're presenting, that you've thought about your body language and your voice and that they match up with your words or the message that you're delivering. Make sure they match up. Then you can focus mostly on your words, because once they match up to your audience is going to rely on your words from there on out. So make sure you take care of body language and voice and then worry about the words. And remember, the Mehrabian Principle only applies when your body language, your voice, and your words do not match up. So that's this week's lesson. I hope you liked it. If you did, please consider our Keystone Communication Skills class. This is a program coming up in May of 2024 here in our Putnam, Connecticut office. The Mehrabian Principle is definitely going to be one of the things we cover, and we'll go into a little more depth in. Keystone communication skills. We call it Keystone skills because we believe these are communication skills that every employee at every level of an organization needs to master in order to communicate effectively. If you don't master these Keystone skills as an individual contributor, you're going to be an ineffective communicator should you ever move up to a management or leadership level. If you're a manager or leader now, but you don't have some of these Keystone skills like active listening, nonverbal communication, adjusting your message to your audience, adjusting your delivery style to your audience, you're not going to be as effective a communicator as you could be if you spent the time mastering these skills. So that's what our Keystone Communication Skills Workshop is all about. It's coming up in May here in Putnam, Connecticut. If you're interested in that, learning about more things like the Mehrabian Principle and other effective communication tools, I encourage you to visit realcustomtraining.com. You can see a description of the workshop. You can send yourself or your employees to it, register them through our online portal. If you are far away from Putnam, Connecticut and listening to this podcast, I still encourage you to check out the website because although you and your team may not be able to attend in May in Putnam when we hold that workshop, you can certainly talk to us, reach out to me directly, and talk to us about booking this as an online workshop for your team. At realcustomtraining.com, you can also see our full catalog of workshops in things like Keystone Communication Skills, Supervisory Fundamentals, Foundations of Leadership, Conflict Resolution, all sorts of different interpersonal skills and areas that we help people improve on so that they can make bigger and better contributions to their organizational success. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. As always, like and subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Spotify or Apple Music. Share the link to the podcast in your organization. Let your coworkers, let your team, let your colleagues know about it. And if you are so inclined, please leave us a positive review as that helps us move up in the podcast rankings and it helps more people discover better workdays. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. See you then.